Hi, and welcome back to ConTinual. It's another episode of the Panel Room, where tonight we are talking about magic, witches, mages, sorcerers, and beyond. But before we dive into that, I'm going to be your host, Jim Nettles. Let's see who has come to cast a spell upon the audience. So, Jeannie, you are up first.
That's fun. I'm always the Adams, right up there at the first. My name is Jeanne Adams. I write paranormal romantic suspense, urban fantasy that has witches in it and lots of magic. And I also write space adventure with my fellow panelist, Nancy Northcott.
Hey, Stuart.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I write all kinds of fantasy, a little bit of science fiction, best known for the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, which have lots of witches and ghosts and things, which I think we'll be talking about today. So.
Jess?
I'm Jess Nettles. I am the author of Children of Menlo Park. I also write Southern Gothic horror and write about witches and other magical creatures.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books and paranormal romantic suspense that I publish independently, which is contemporary setting. Two very, very different kinds of magic. I also write romantic suspense without magic. And as Jeannie said, she and I write science fiction together.
Hansi?
Hi, I'm Hansi Oppenheimer, and my company is Sweet Projects. I'm a practicing witch, and my first documentary I ever made was on witchcraft and love spells. And I love urban fantasy and magic in movies and books.
And Michael?
I'm Michael G. Williams. I write queer-themed science fiction, horror, and urban fantasy, including a series called Wither Chronicles, which features multiple kinds of witches who practice multiple types of magic. Urban fantasy time travel series about witches in modern-day San Francisco that starts with Through the Doors of Oblivion. I'm the co-host for Arcane Carolinas, a show about myths, legends, and the modern weird in the Carolinas, including we've done some really deep dives into accusations of witchcraft in the Carolinas and history. And I also am a practicing witch. My pinnacle is a little out of frame. And I read tarot and do all that kind of stuff and try to incorporate that into my fiction.
So let's actually start, before we dive into the fiction, to talk a little bit about, how do we respectfully deal with Wiccan and the various magical systems as belief systems, and balance that and be respectful about when we're working this into fiction. So we're going about talking fiction and fantasy. It's two very different things, but often we see some mix and match, or also we see sometimes the practitioners being displayed in evil ways. So how do we go about this and sometimes respect the belief system, while at the same time being able to go and have fun with the idea of the topics, the myth, the legend, the lore? So Jeannie, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Well, I think you've actually hit on your question. It's being respectful. It's realizing that this is a belief system, that this is just as valid as any other belief system that anyone might have, whether that's be Judaism or Hinduism or Confucianism, being a Wiccan, being a pagan, being a nature person, whether you're a coven person or a solitary person. All of that is to be respected as someone's belief system. And I think that our hardest thing is to overcome so many of the visual stereotypes we've gotten from film and TV. And of course, the preponderance of things that are constantly talking about Salem. And, I love there's a t-shirt that says, not all witches live in Salem. And I'm like, as a matter of fact, very few of them actually do.
It wasn't welcoming for a period.
Exactly. I mean, it's not a very nice, memory for those of us who practice. So, I think it's mostly just focusing on being respectful. Obviously, we as fiction authors are making the choice to create an environment where either bad things happen or suspenseful things happen, but we always have to remember to be respectful too.
Stuart?
Well, part of me, you said to not going into the fiction, so I kind of want to defer to the.
Well, then go forth.
The group.
Well, you're still writing about it, and often with them as the villains.
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, for me, a couple things. One is I did not like base my witch's magic on real practice, although it was a combination of just witch lore through osmosis of what I've, just growing up and the stuff you hear and see, mixing it with other things that just interested me. So I kind of created my own rules and played with it that way. And even before the thing I'm about to tell you, from the very beginning, when I started getting fan mail for the Max Porter stuff, I'd get fan mail from people who'd say I'm a practicing witch or I'm Wicca or Wiccan, and they'd say how much they enjoyed the book. So I figured, okay, I must be doing it at least in a non-offensive way. I know I'm not doing it right in the sense that I'm not actually depicting their religion, but I'm not doing it in a way that's bothering them, even though most of the witches are villains. However, the main character is Max Porter and his wife. Starting, I can't remember which book. I want to say like book 4, but starting early on in the series, she starts to embrace magic. She has a sixth sense and sees dead people, and that's kind of what starts her on this road. And so she's determined to be a good witch and use all this power that she's learning to use for good and try not to get corrupted by it. But and a lot of witches are neither good nor bad, though they're just in it for themselves and use it whichever way it works. But so it's weird because I have to be honest, I didn't set out to be like, I need to be respectful of all the people who have this belief. I was just creating a believable villain for the early books. And then as the series became successful, I had to actually codify some of this stuff. And as I did that, it just kind of grew into something that, I mean, probably my readers could tell you why better than I could, why it doesn't. I'll take that, but I'm conscious of it now, like in the last half of the series, that I've certainly been much more aware of it. So
I think mixing traditions is that difficult. I don't think it's problematic because, over, the decades I've been practicing, and my mom practiced too. And so it's a hodgepodge of, powwow and, voodoo, all sorts of different things, but, you do whatever works. I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't work like in the movies where like rose petals fly through the air or something really cool. But I don't know what it is. If it's just self-affirmation or what, I wish it was like the books, like poof.
Well, I think that might be actually one of the reasons why witches seem to appreciate my witches, is that they can't just poof. It takes work. It takes time to create a spell. And I've often likened it to an electric eel that creates electricity by using the energy in the water around it. And so it's all about that. There's even somewhere else at some point, Max's wife describes it as saying, magic is not like magic. It's not like made out of nothing. It's just knowledge of how to use the energy that's already there in a different way. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't mean to cut in. Well, one of the things that I see a lot of, and both from practice and in fiction, I mean, for example, one of my series, I worked in a lot of low country root magic. It's not something that's widely known, but I worked in a bunch of fruit magic. The practice is kind of the way it works. But all of it, and I'm very clear about this, is it's all about the focus of intention as you're going through. I don't know, Hansi, Michael, if you guys want to, add anything to that or.
Well, root magic is cool. I went to Defusky because that was, an area where there was a lot of like hoodoo and sort of talk to people there about that. So, I mean, there's a million, Appalachian, there's a million traditions, so, but I like that, it's drawing the energy because that is really what it is.
Yeah, I think that, and I'm hopefully not stealing a point that Jeanne made before the panel started, but like a lot of times fiction treats magic, witchcraft, whatever sort of term one wants to use for it. It treats witch characters and magic using characters as villainous by virtue of having taken like a shortcut. you know. And even in Buffy, where like she's surrounded by people who have taken a big, obvious way to cheat death, and yet most of the people, I think every character who uses magic in that show at one point or another is either explicitly a villain or magic somehow corrupts them, despite the fact that like literal vampires running around in the background and the foreground are just dandy. So I think that there's this way in which fiction tends to treat it as cheating.
You think
And that
it's also
lends
because
itself-
it's primarily women?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you look at history, of course, like a lot of witchcraft accusations and witch trials and that sort of scare have largely been about seizing property from women who were independent. So, and that's true across a lot of cultures, and it was very true in Salem also. But I think that as long as, like you said, Stuart, if you treat it as like work and you depict it as having been a practice rather than a shortcut, it's an approach to the universe that is actually in some ways more work than not using it. And that's a pretty good foundation for being respectful about it. In my own fiction, I tend to like make witches be really attached to a particular style of magic as a way of showing that they've had to like really dedicate themselves to this as a study. This is something that they've invested themselves in, not something where they're just like picking the pocket of reality. So I think that that's a really important distinction to draw. But I also think it's important to depict some of the practices accurately, in part because like it's not hugely discussed necessarily down at like the Target, but online people talk a lot about the way that like magic and explorations of this sort of practice are very much sort of growing right now. They're growing in prevalence. There are a lot more people who are curious about it as a legitimate spiritual path for themselves. And so I think that by giving people both a depiction that's not villainous and a depiction that shows them that this could be real work, then in some ways we're respecting the reader more, but also we're giving the reader characters that they can identify with as characters that they wouldn't mind turning into themselves. And I think that that's a really important part of all speculative genres. It's important that if we're going to attract readers, we have to show them characters that they wouldn't mind becoming themselves, maybe that they actively want to become themselves. So I think that that's another important part of being respectful about this.
Well, let's kind of start jumping into the fiction side of things. And Stuart, I'm going to pop back to you to start this off. What influences do you use in building your characters, in your, magic using characters?
What influences do I? It depends on the story. I'll bring actually. So I have coming out starting at the end of this year and all throughout next year, I have a 7-issue comic book series called The Bluesman that's coming out, and in it there is a bunch of hoodoo and voodoo that's involved, and so for that I did a lot of research, and we knew we were going to be using that specific type of magic as one of the magic things in the series, and I needed to get it right. So there are some older documentaries that actually basically film entire ceremonies and entire evenings of that practice, which are awesome to watch. And honestly, I went straight from that, and I was like, okay, that's the basis of this. I mean, I wasn't going to spend years, joining a group and getting in that depth. It was for comic book, and but enough that I wanted for when I develop a character, it depends on how often how deep that character is going to be in a book or in a series. It will depend on how far I'll go with it. But in this case, I just needed a depiction so that anybody who knows anything about voodoo or hoodoo could look at it and say, okay, he at least kind of knows what he's talking about, and the character's only in there for one issue so far. So I think, as opposed to some of my other witches where they've been around for a long time in the series, and so the longer they stick around, usually longer than I think they're going to, I have to start actually doing some research so that the words coming out of their mouth are authentic. Does that kind of answer what you're asking me?
Sure.
Sure, why not?
So, Jess, how about you? What kind of influences do you use or have you used in creating some of your stories?
A lot of times when I'm creating a witchy sort of character, I kind of dig into culture and I try to learn, okay, so what kind of magic is prevalent in the culture and go that direction, study the history, start dabbling around and seeing, okay, what sort of magic is going on here and what do they use, and kind of grow it from there. So like in my novel, there's a character who's Romani, and I was really working hard not to make this character cliche and end up insulting people. I was real scared about that. So I studied the culture as much as I could, and studied what was actually happening during the period in the 19th century with these people. What were they doing? What was happening maybe in the United States with the Romani, and kind of pulled out some of the magic that I thought was interesting, that was relevant, and just kind of grew it from there. And included some music, which for me, music is magical anyway. And so I sort of pulled in that musical energy. So my character uses music as a primary source for her magic. I also have another character with a novel that's kind of in development. And so I've been learning a lot about Appalachian magic, which is very, very interesting. Then I've got a third idea I'm messing around with these 3 over 50 witches, and the youngest sister is just learning that she is a witch. She thinks she's doesn't have any power, but she does. And so I'm tapping around once again with kind of mountain magic, but kind of creating my own magical system. The first experience with the novel kind of gave me some confidence. Now, where this is going to go, I don't know. I'm mostly writing that more as comical kind of things. So we've got things like the girls blowing up a demon in a church, in the first story, things like that. So, but mostly I go back to, just researching and trying my best to find the best way to respect the belief structure and use, the basics that I learn and kind of grow it from there. And hopefully I don't end up making anybody mad.
It was a great book on Romani magic by Ray Buckland.
Okay.
He was Romani and grew up in England. And in fact, Buckland in Charmed is named after him. And
Okay.
I got to interview him for my film. He's no longer around, but he was really interesting and spoke about growing up in that culture.
I remember his name. Did he write several books?
Yes. He wrote a bunch of books on magic, and then he wrote the book on Romani and growing up that way. And
cool.
Yeah, my teacher always referred to one of his books as the Big Blue Book.
There's a great, fairly new book that is on Appalachian magic traditions. I'll see if I can find the information for you, Jess, and get it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So how about you, Nancy?
Well, I have 2 slightly different magic systems in the 2 different series. The one in the contemporary books is much more complex. When I started writing that series, I knew I wanted to arc it over at least 7 or 8 books with some novellas thrown in. And that to me meant I needed a fairly well-developed magic system. I need to know it, even though the characters don't. And there's a lot about it the characters don't. That's been lost in the mists of their history. I read a lot about Wicca, but I did not want to just use Wicca. It's like we said a couple of weeks ago when we did a panel on mythological tropes in science fiction and fantasy. One person's mythology is another person's belief system. And so I tend to avoid overt religion of any kind. And so I borrow a little bit here and I borrow a little bit there. And the reading about Wicca led me kind of to elemental magic, earth, air, fire, and water. And then from there, I kind of I read a couple of books on candle magic, a couple of books on crystal magic, a couple of books on herbology. one of the characters in the series, the one in Embattled Mage, is very musical. And so he's also a doctor. And so he uses music for its healing properties, but not really for anything else. He uses it in conjunction with other things. So what I was really looking for is a system that drew from a number of different traditions. The mages in that series draw on natural energy around them to recharge their magic, and they have to be very careful. For example, the doctor almost never recharges in the hospital because there are too many sick, weak people around, and if he slips up, it's a problem. So in the other series, I just went for something a whole lot simpler, and it's like magic is an innate ability that you have or you don't have. You can use it for various different things, but like running a mile, your stamina varies. It takes it out of you, it takes energy and power out of you to use it. So I think I stayed away from using any specific tradition just because, like Jessica says, I don't want to offend anybody and I don't want to be an advocate for or against any religious system. So I kind of took a little bit here and a little bit there and kind of made a quilt of a system, and for once had the sense to write it down so that I would have a record of it.
Story Bible. Just saying.
Hansi, how about you?
You know what I was thinking? I was thinking about Amber Benson's witchcraft books, The Witches of Echo Park. And she also has Calliope, Daughter of Death series. And I'm wondering now, like, about the Echo Park witches, because they're so powerful and female and supportive. I'm wondering if that was a reaction to the way the witches were treated on Buffy since she was Tara.
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
A good thought.
Meta, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, witches are kind of, and most of the movies, they're pretty much the bad guys. Although there's so many movies about witches now, you know, I mean, it sort of came back around. I don't know if that's still true. It wasn't true in the last couple of years with The Witch and everything.
But we're still getting so many in visual media that the witch is always the bad guy, always the one doing things behind people's backs. And I have yet to. I mean, I was so hopeful when Buffy started and they were getting into magic that would end up being, and then they just twisted around and it's all bad. It's like, damn it!
Yeah. Suddenly it was a drug addiction.
Yeah, yeah.
Dorothy Rosenberg.
Instead of making it, you know, something that gives people agency and
well, it did at first, and then
yeah. But
so, Michael, how about you for your various systems? You know,
so my answer is going to be unnecessarily academic, and that's true of almost everything that comes out of my mouth in any sort of formal setting. So that's just the way it is. Also, I'm not going to claim. I don't pretend to expertise with this answer. So it would be very easy and legit to think that I am just like blowing smoke with what I'm about to say. So I say all that because like it's going to sound so, I don't know, like I've thought about it a lot and I haven't.
Oh, the build up here is killing me.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm going to actually like get to the answer now. Magic in specific and in general, spirituality as opposed to religion, but even to some degree religion, have two features in how they're practiced almost everywhere. They are practiced in temporary spaces and they are practiced in hidden spaces. And if you can get a temporary hidden space, then that's like even better. So a tent revival is a temporary space for Christians, and a like druidic circle out in the middle of the woods somewhere is a hidden space. You know, and like anytime you look at what's significant in the practice of religion or a spiritual practice, or especially a somewhat concealed or private religious practice like witchcraft, then you've really got an emphasis on those things. And so when I come up with witches for my books, I almost always never start from like a real practice of witchcraft or magic or anything like that. Instead, I sort of like try to look for spaces that fit those conditions but are unconventional. So like in one of my series, I have a coven of witches called the Book People, and they're called that because they only ever practice magic by breaking into library book sales. and that's like a hidden space, and it's a
Cool.
temporary space. And it's
sacred.
A place of power, you know, and there are
It's
like a lot
definitely
of
sacred.
words there.
Absolutely, Hansi.
And a place of power.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a place of power. There are really important words there. A lot of people care a lot about it. Nobody's looking that closely. It's out of the way, you know, etc. And I have another coven in the Wither Chronicles called the Techno-Pagans. I myself call what I do techno-paganism, which I hope I'm not appropriating when I do this, but
Cyber pagan.
I am. I sort of have this like stone
I think
soup
it's a thing. I don't
practice.
think it's appropriating.
Yeah. And, you know, I kind of borrow from whatever is useful because I'm an engineer in my day job and I'm an engineer sort of as a witch. So, but the techno-pagans sort of rose from me thinking about like people who work for startups, and there's like a lot of intense emotion there, and it's kind of a temporary space and it's kind of a hidden space, and they have all this like arcane knowledge of technology, and like a practice would arise out of that, and those sorts of people would find each other, and that would become magic in a world where magic was as demonstrably real as anything else. Then the people who form like weird subreddits would become weird covens, you know. And so like those are my two features, like every
That's
kind
clever.
of huh.
That's really clever. I like that.
You know,
and,
like in
developers are
in
never allowed to
Emperor
come
Norton
out of the
books,
darkness.
like through the doors of oblivion, then in that those witches are in temporary hidden spaces by virtue of living in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. So they're like living in a single room occupancy. It's these two witches who are a couple, and they're sharing a 6x9 room where like if they pay extra, they get a room with a sink in it. And that's really hidden because it's kind of concealed from the rest of society. The rest of the city of San Francisco likes to just sort of pretend the Tenderloin is not there, even though it is the geographic center of the city. And it's a temporary space by virtue of like nobody has a lease. They pay rent by the week, you know. And so like magic would arise out of something like that as well. And that's my answer. I feel like that's a really long and weird answer. I don't know.
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's a great answer in the sense that one of the great things about writing about magic is that whether you're a practitioner, like some of us are, or whether you're writing about it without being a practitioner, magic and the pagan space is more malleable because of the very nature of magic and its practice. Everyone comes to it from their own perspective with their own set of desires and will and whatever. Whereas there are so many rules in other traditions that thou shalt not do this or that or the other. And, you know, most pagans have pretty much one rule.
There's huge argument going on TikTok regularly with the pagans and the Wiccans and the Druids and the just fighting about like what witchcraft is. And it's just like witchcraft is whatever you say it is. You know, if you can write something down on a piece of paper, put it in your pocket, concentrate on it, you know, affirm it, that's magic. You know, you don't have to have, you know, the pentagram and the candles and, you know, you don't, you know. So them arguing about it is just, I'm lurking. I'm watching this from the sidelines. Just like, oh, come on, people, this is stupid.
Also, I think any practitioner is going to say, in their heart of hearts at least, that magic is much more effective when done in private, done in secret, you know?
Yeah.
And like the more people who watch you do it, the more you try to do it in front of people, the less effective it's going to be, if at all, in my experience. And so I think that probably the best answer to that argument is magic is the thing you would never claim it is in public. So they're all defeating themselves.
Yeah, that's good.
So taking all of that, I was on a panel not long ago, and we were talking about how you go about creation of magic systems. And I said, to me, the creation of it is part technology, where you treat the magic as a technology, whatever it is however you're trying to manage it and everything else. And the other part is the belief system that creates the intention that powers the tool. And so when you look at things from that way, how do you go about creating magic systems? What are the things that you find are necessary to magic systems? What are magic systems that appeal to you? So, Jess, I'll start with you on this one.
Oh, goodness. You didn't give me time to think.
That's not my job.
That's not your job. I know. Oh, geez.
While I ramble, that's your time to think.
Well, I was trying, but I was also trying to follow where you were going. You were taking me through this little path, and I'm like, okay, I'm following it. I know he's got cheese, and I know, and here I am, and oh no.
Down the rabbit hole.
Wait, you're saying following Jim took you down the wrong path? That's such a shock.
This is normal. I should know better. This is a family trait. Following the cousin always gets me into trouble. Always. Okay, so let's see if I can answer this question and not sound like a complete fool. So I think maybe probably the first step for me, when I initially started trying to figure out the magic system for children, was trying to figure out what characters believed. What was the belief structure that I wanted to use? And laying down those initial rules, even though we're saying there's basically no rules, we can, kind of do. There are some rules that I think you need to follow when you are writing about it, so that you don't end up just pulling things out of the air for no reason, right? So what are those rules, and what do these characters believe will happen when they do these things? What's going to happen when she sings a song, if she believes hard enough? And where does this belief come from? Where are the roots of this belief? Which means she has a whole backstory. And then just kind of following what she's telling you that is true, which sounds really metaphysical. And I'm not sure I'm making a hell of a lot of sense.
Magic systems. Okay, then.
Yeah. So that's a real basic magic system. How I grow it from there, it just kind of grows on its own. Does that make sense? Am I making sense at all? I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're making sense.
Okay.
So, Nancy, how about you? Because you've built a couple of magic systems now.
Well, it depends on what I need the characters to do with it. In the historical series, the story really centers on the history. There's one magic system, that innate ability that you can draw within yourself. And when you run out of power, you have to rest and recharge. It's very simple, and it leaves me room to focus on the history. You can do lots of things with that, like we were saying earlier, with what's your intention when you wield the power. But it also has limits, because if a magic system doesn't have limits, you've got the Superman problem. And who wants that? So that's simpler, and it leaves room for the history to be the focus of the story. The contemporaries are mages battling ghouls and demons from the void between worlds in southern Georgia near the Okefenokee Swamp. That's where it's set. So I needed magic for a war for that book. And that means my heroes need to be able to do a whole lot more different things. And they need opposition who have their own different, darker magic system. And so what I did with my brainstorming group was we came up with that basic magic system I talked about earlier. And then once we had that set, okay, this is what the good guys do. Who are the bad guys? What did they do? And we wanted them to be really revolting. So their magic system is much, much simpler. They also draw on energy around them, but that's it. They practice dark magic, blood magic. They're sort of vampiric in that they can suck life energy or magical energy out with their talons or blood, should they choose to do that, as they did in one book.
I just pictured Colin Robinson.
Yeah, so it's different. It depends on the
totally different.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the needs of the story. And so in one story, I need oppositional magic creatures, and in the other one, I don't. And so I kind of built things around what those two stories, different types of stories, needed.
Very logical.
Hansi, how about you? What kind of magic systems appeal to you? What goes into them?
Well, let me talk about some media because that's more my field. And I'm not a writer. I'm a fangirl writing, not a writer fangirling. So for years, Bell, Book and Candle was one of my favorite movies, and I always wanted to remake it. And I wanted to change the end so she doesn't have to turn human to fall in love. It's like,
Yes.
and she's
Amen,
so
sister.
awesome
Amen.
and creative and artsy and looks fabulous when she's a witch. And then suddenly she's in fluffy chiffon with shells and crying. And it's like, for Jimmy Stewart, this is what we went through. So I always wanted to remake that and do it like a punk version in the Chelsea Hotel. And while I was like talking about making it, I ran into a bunch of witches. Well, it was probably during the documentary period. And they said that witches had put a spell on that movie, that no one could ever remake it. So we'll see about that. But I would love to see like a version where like she doesn't have to give up her power.
Yeah. She doesn't have to change to be somebody else.
Yeah, like why? It's so unfair. And WandaVision again, why does Wanda have to be bad? Why does Agatha have to be bad? Like Wanda was just dealing with trauma.
Right.
And unchecked power.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Why is it that women? Why are women always portrayed as having the unchecked power, though?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, look at Loki.
Look at Doctor Strange. talk about unchecked power.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but nobody
Somehow
holds
that's
him
not-
back.
Somehow that's not
Right.
bad. And somehow Tony Stark creating Ultron he doesn't then become demonized because he did it. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm confused.
At least
Yeah.
She-Hulk seems to be able to control her anger.
Even as a child watching Bewitched, I was like, Samantha is great. Her powers are cool. All of her relatives are more interesting than anyone else in her life. And
my
Darren
God.
is not worth this.
No.
I have a whole theory of what happens at the end of Bewitched after it's over with and canceled. I have a whole theory.
Like
Samantha
fanfic?
divorces Darren's scrawny little ass. She gets the
Runs away
house.
with uncle. What was her crazy uncle? Paul Lynn.
Paul Lynn.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm trying.
The uncle moves into the house. Darren gets to move into a tiny, ridiculous apartment, and she lives her life happily and takes her children to Jupiter and Mars, and they go and have happy summers with Endora and live happily ever after. Amen. And he has to pay child support for the rest of his sad little life.
Yeah, so many of the stories are about like men taming the women's power. Like there were books about it. I forget the name of the writer, but then they made I Married a Witch based on the book.
Yeah.
And it's the same kind of, I think it's Veronica Lake in it. But I think it's the same kind of thing where, she has powers and of course has to dumb them down because her husband's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Let him be uncomfortable.
Or kick
So,
his ass
Michael.
to the curb.
Yeah, get another
Yeah.
witch girlfriend.
Just
Like,
kick his
yeah.
ass to the curb.
Yeah.
So, Michael,
I'm
how
all for
about
that.
you? Developing your magical systems. What are the things that appeal to you? How you go about it? What are the things that you want to see there?
So I tend to start from like really formal ideas about the practices of magic. Like, are they mostly practicing divinatory magic? Are they mostly practicing sympathetic magic, where you have something like the thing you want to affect and you affect the thing that you have and it creates the effect in the thing that you really want to affect? So like a voodoo doll, that sort of thing. Or is it magic that follows like what's called the law of contagion, which is not a great term to use right now, but it's a traditional term for the idea of like collecting somebody's toenail clippings and you do magic on that and that affects the person, that sort of thing. The idea that once two things were once joined will always be joined, so if you take a part of the thing and affect that part, then you affect the whole. And I kind of start from there, and then I steal from chaos magic this notion that basically all magic is an attempt to solve a probability equation, and you want to some effect to have a probability of 1. And so you have to sort of decide ahead of time, like, what are the probabilities of it happening just on its own? You know, if I want to get $1 million tomorrow, what are the odds that that's going to happen on its own? And, you know, what are the odds that it could happen without magical intervention? And then how much magic do I need to do to fill in the gap between that probability without magic and that probability of 1? And then it's basically, what are they willing to do? How big of an ask are they trying to make? And so if there's somebody who practices divinatory magic, then I'll try to find some divinatory system that's real that I can learn enough about to depict in a realistic way if I don't already practice it myself. And even if I do, I am not the expert in it. So I want to learn as much about it as I possibly can so that I don't mess it up and make myself look real dumb. And then if it's sympathetic magic, then I try to figure out what's their sort of aesthetic with that sympathetic magic. So do they do, do they make a drawing of the person? Do they try to sneak a photograph of the person? Do they make a puppet of the person?
They cut out the labels in their clothes.
Yeah, exactly. You never know. Whatever works. And then if they're doing law of contagion magic, then what are they collecting and how are they going about it and how creepy is that? Because it's creepy. There is no such thing as a non-creepy version of law of contagion magic. And I probably just really pissed off some fellow neo-pagan somewhere, and I'm sorry, that's just my take. So but I'll correct that by saying that if you take it from yourself, then it's not creepy. So it's
I think that's a younger witch thing. I think as you get older, you decide, I don't want to tie my fate to anybody else's. As a younger witch, you're I can control this. And then later you're like, ugh.
Yeah. I think that the more you do it, the more you realize it can be unpredictable. And so it's I don't know. Yeah. But I try to pick sort of what school of magic do they practice? And then what's their what's the look? If I had to run this past the costuming department, what would they do with it? And then sort of what sort of set would I envision it happening on?
And this is all for a novel? This sort of, and this is for a novel or?
Oh yeah, totally. Oh. But you gotta I'm a very visual thinker. I don't necessarily succeed at putting those visions on the page, but when I'm writing, I'm very much watching it happen in my head. Mm-hmm. And so I need a really strong visual understanding of what are they doing? What are they using to create this magic? Things like that. So with the witches in San Francisco, they're practicing just straight up ceremonial magic. It is all about knowing the right words to say in the right order, in the right language, in the right time, standing in the right place, using the right kind of knife, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very prescriptive, and very formulaic, very recipe based. But the techno-pagans, they've memorized shortcuts, by which I mean like shortcuts on a computer desktop. They've got programs that are spells that they've memorized to the point that, if one of them says gravity in the right tone of voice, then they can affect which direction gravity is moving for them and thus scale the wall or whatever they need to do, And that sort of thing is kind of how I try to approach it. I think ultimately every character's system of magic is going to come from who they are and what led them to magic in the first place. Because I think that's true in real life. I think that in my experience, people who want to learn a lot about divination wish that they had had the ability to see something coming at some point. And people who want to practice sympathetic magic have a really strong understanding of and really creative way of viewing the world and seeing how things are like other things and drawing those sorts of correspondences. And they tend to be very visual people and very visual thinkers and often artists. And so that's kind of where I come from.
How about you, Jeannie? What goes into those systems you're building?
Oh my gosh, I could listen to all of y'all talk about this forever because I just got dozens of ideas from hearing about each one of you talk. For me, I usually start with what needs to happen and what is it going to cost. When I build a magic system, there's always got to be a cost because, as Nancy said, otherwise you have the Superman problem. And I'm not really fond of having to figure out kryptonite. So I like to figure out what are we trying to achieve in the story and then how would you do it normally, and then how would you do it with magic, and what is that going to cost? And I like to try to think of it, of practitioners in terms of, I'm a martial artist. So, you see Jackie Chan do martial arts, and nobody thinks about the fact that he's been practicing since he was 5.
Yeah.
And so he does all these great, fantastic things that the average person couldn't do because he's been practicing since he was 5. So the way I think about magical practitioners, whether they're witches or Wiccans or druids or whatever is, if you've been practicing this a long time, you're going to have results that the average normal person isn't going to have. And that's just like martial arts. There's a lot of things that you can do in this world. It may not be poof, the flower petals go circling around like you were talking about, Hansi, but you can affect a lot of things because you have practiced, right? So what's a practitioner look like in my particular type of magic that I'm building? What does a dabbler look like in my particular magic system that I'm building? In my Witches Walk series, which is witches, based in a town, I know, right, Stuart? Based in a town north of Salem. They're the actual witches who escaped before the trials, because being witches, they figured out what was going to happen, so they got out of there.
Are they in Gloucester? I like Gloucester.
Yeah, it's actually more like Newburyport. It's 50 miles away. So the system there is basically built on the system of what sort of built up around Salem type of magic, but with some additional traditions, or some, if you will, better traditions that kept them from sight and kept them, as Michael was saying, in those sort of liminal spaces between where it's either temporary or very private. And so they sort of hide in plain sight. But what I had to figure out there was, especially with everybody sort of being familiar with Salem, how do I turn that? What's the price? What's the cost? And so then for the urban fantasies, that was something I really looked at in terms of how does that connect with the natural world, and more elemental magic, and more in terms of drawing power and magic from the world around. But still, I had to look at what's the cost? What's the exchange, right? You're getting this power, you're doing this thing without actually wielding a hammer and nails, but you're still getting it built. What's the cost to you of doing that? And so the magic systems I've built, I always fundamentally start with, okay, what's this going to cost?
And one of the
that works for books. I think that makes sense for story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the really well-developed magic systems I think everybody goes back to is the idea of Mistborn and the minerals. Yeah, you have to take this metal imbued gives you these capabilities. You can burn it this way, but there's still other costs to it. And I think the cost is often the part that we miss, even though that's the control agent. So, Stuart, how about you? What are the elements that you look at? What are the things that make a magic system for you?
So I pretty much figured out I was going to be the last one on this, which meant everybody's going to say everything I could possibly say, which you more or less have. But I will say this is the way I look at it. When I'm creating a new magic system, it's like this dance between what the story wants, what I want, and a cost or a limiting factor. And so I don't think I've ever sat down and just been like, I'm going to create a magic system and it's going to be this and it's going to do this and here are the limits. It always first is like, well, what do I need my characters to be able to do?
Right.
And then, or like I said, it's a dance. So it could start at any point. Sometimes it starts with me going, wouldn't it be cool if you could do X? And then I start getting a story, and the story starts saying, well, that would be cool, but then the story's over on page 2, so you better come up with a way to limit it, and so forth. So this is why, and like in the Max Porter stories, it is very much of a more traditional type of witchcraft in terms of casting circles and candles and things like that. and thus it takes time. And so that was one way to limit it, so nobody could be like, oh no, the bad guy's a gun on us, magic, and it's over. Nothing like that. It would be more like, could you just hold that gun for about 10 minutes and let me draw this circle? It's not going to happen. So I constantly keep them in a very grounded situation there. But for example, for Falstaff books, I wrote a trilogy that's epic fantasy and mysteries brought together. And there are magic users in that who I do call witches, but they're not meant to be actual witches. It's just the word being used. And sadly, yes, they're the villains. but they,
damn it, Stuart.
You are the problem, Stuart. You are the
I'm
problem.
going to write a good witch story now just for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But in that one, they really, the magic has the ability to really do to do anything they could dream up. What's the cost though? There are two factors. One, again, there's a time factor. It's not as easy as just snapping your fingers. There's a little bit that goes into making a spell, and that means you need some time. But the big thing is that one of the ingredients to any spell you're going to do is one of your own teeth. And therefore, you can only possibly cast as many spells as you have adult teeth. And the bigger the ask, this is something Michael was saying, the bigger the ask, the more you have to do. So there are I don't know, if you want to be king of the world, you might have to use, half the teeth in your mouth.
Can you do spells to get your teeth back?
No, I never addressed that, but no, that wouldn't work.
I wish for more wishes.
Wish for more wishes, right?
Yeah.
So that I was an extremely limiting factor. So therefore, if you're in a dark, scary place, you don't just go, oh, I can snap my fingers and make light. You got to really want that light badly because you are giving up so much to make a spell, and therefore, that's a way to stop magic from being the answer. And that's usually the case, is stopping magic from being the answer to whatever the problem or conflict is in a book. And rather, it should be a tool that you can aid you in whatever your plan is, but not the answer itself.
So
A good answer.
yeah. And I always love that answer about the teeth. My only question was this: how do you practice to get good?
Yeah.
Chipping
lost
away.
your
You start off the hard way. I mean, it ain't easy.
Everybody's got a bridge by the time they learn a level 1 spell.
Well, just because
Hogwarts,
since we're
they're
talking
all
about it, I
cheap.
think it's neat. Is the witches there? They all wear veils, so you can't see their mouths.
Cool.
Because if you meet somebody and she only has 4 teeth in her mouth, she knows what the hell she's doing. She doesn't have a lot left to do it with, but it's not somebody you want to really mess around, because 4 teeth could mess you up bad if she really wanted to.
That's funny.
So, and we've only really gotten started on the topic, but so I want everybody to think about this. What's the one thing in terms of talking about witches and magic systems and warlocks and mages and all of this? What's the one thing that you still think is important we haven't even had a chance to touch on yet? And Nancy, you're going to get to go first.
Yeah, I had that feeling. Being acquainted with the alphabet, I had that feeling.
It's a magic
is that what
system
we're
into
doing?
and of itself.
Well, why are you putting magic in the story in the first place? Why do you need it? If you're just putting it in there as window dressing, what's the point? Like Stuart was saying, it's a tool. It should be something to help the story accomplish its story goal and the characters to accomplish their goals. And yeah, it's like in a romance novel. If your hero and the heroine resolve their conflicts on page 2, your book is over. So back in the early days of the paranormal romance genre, the editors used to say, well, if you can't take all the magic or the shifters or the woo-woo or the whatever out of it, we're not going to buy it. And those of us who came out of the fantasy and science fiction and comic book tradition are like, then why would I put it in there? And that was a very odd position for them to take, because the book that launched paranormal romance really as a big genre, Stardust of Yesterday by Lynn Kurland, which is a wonderful book. The hero literally was a ghost. If the hero's not a ghost, the whole story doesn't work. And that book kicked off a genre and won scads of awards. At the same time, a lot of editors are saying, well, we'll take window dressing and nothing else. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, is that there needs to be a reason you're doing this with magic and not just doing it with people.
Hansi, what is it for you? What's the thing we haven't touched on yet?
A lot of the magic stuff I read are like magic detectives. I love that genre, Dresden Files, Kolchak, whatever. I like, the supernatural mystery mashup. So if we can get, the witches in, sort of try and discover something or protect something, or there has to be a reason for it, but I do like it, just as it's a cool genre, and so I'm in for the genre, and I'm glad the writers are thinking about the stories and stuff, because I'm just there for the witchcraft and the cool story, and I trust you guys to organize the other stuff.
Michael, how about you? What have we not hit on yet?
I think that one of the most interesting kinds of story, of fantasy story, in any genre, the most interesting story is always the fish out of water, right? And what we especially like is a perspective character who is not native to whatever situation they've been thrust into, because they make a really great psychological bridge between the reader and the world and the story. And what I don't see a ton of, and I would love to see more of, are books in which a person who does not have access to magic finds themselves in an explicitly magical context. So they're, the magical detective, but it's not that they have magic powers, it's that all their clients do. Things like that. A person who has to be able to solve the problem, but without using magic. And for whom the goal is not to become a user of magic or initiated into whatever the practice is or whatever, but to always, not necessarily have it as a goal, but that they're a character who's always going to be outside of that world. They're never going to be a part of it. It's not a conversion story where they get turned into the thing that can use magic, but instead they're just always a character who is outside of that. I just find that really fascinating as an idea, and I don't immediately think of a ton of examples of that.
Yeah.
But I really love that idea.
I mean, there's some things like the new Sabrina and stuff where people don't know they have the powers, but there's really nothing where they're dropped into that world with no power. I don't know of any. I mean, Kolchak, but
Stuart.
Subtle Stuart, yeah. So try that finger point one more time. How about you, Jeannie? What's the thing we haven't touched on yet?
Well, I guess we haven't touched a lot on visual media and movies and things that portray witchcraft and how they do it, because as authors we have to do it on the page with words. With visual media, whether that's TV or streaming or movies, they have special effects, and
although it starts with words.
It does
And our budgets don't change.
No. But I think we haven't really touched on the ways in which magic is portrayed in video and film and TV, sometimes really well, and sometimes really cheesy, and sometimes really badly.
And sometimes all three at once.
Yes.
Mind that though.
And as a filmmaker, I'm sure Hansi would agree with that.
Cheesy's okay. I like cheesy.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind Halloween Town. I don't mind Hocus Pocus. I mean, I love those, and they're cheesy. But then there's also, The Witch Hunter, and I'm like,
Love Witch.
Really? Did we have to go there? Really?
Which one?
The Witch
Love
Hunter.
Witch.
Oh, it didn't. Yeah, and like Homeland and stuff, I just couldn't do, and it would break my heart.
Yeah.
Stuart, how about you? What's the one thing we haven't gotten on tonight that?
Well, I think one thing I think would be interesting to delve a little bit more into is just the idea that when we write a story, magic and witches and all that's fun, but if you want your witch to be a real, we need to remember that we have to write real human beings, real characters. I think sometimes we all get so absorbed with, look at the cool thing I've created magic wise for this character to do, that we forget to create the character to do the magic thing. Like they're just a shell of a, two-dimensional character. And so we got to remember to pull the magic away for a moment and actually develop a real human being or creature that we're using magic or whatever we're writing.
And Jess?
Well, to kind of piggyback on creating that character, I've been sitting here thinking we need to talk more about creating witchy characters that are maybe a little older than usual, because so often we portray these young women doing magic, which is, and I think about Willow and Buffy, and it's wonderful. But what about those of us who are a little older and are still, trying to figure it out and trying to do the thing? And maybe some of us already have a lot of experience. I think about you, Hansi. And then there are those who maybe are just kind of dabbling around and trying things. And maybe we should write about characters like that too. I think we're missing a lot of opportunities by not writing about characters who are maybe over 50.
Love the two ants in Practical Magic. I think they're my favorite characters. The younger women I could care less about, but the ants are awesome.
They are. It's one of my favorite movies.
I definitely want to cosplay them with somebody sometime because they look awesome.
I'm with you. I'll do it.
Awesome.
I'm in.
Thank God.
Well, we've gone a little over time, but before we get out of here, let's make sure everybody knows where to come find you guys. What's the latest thing you want to go promote, all that kind of good stuff, social media. And because we're going to unwind this clock, Michael, I'm going to start with you and we're going to work backwards.
Alrighty, you can find me at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com. You can also find me at arcanecarolinas.com. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook as at McManlyPants, and as in the manly pants of Scotland. And you can also find me in February in person at RetCon in Cary, North Carolina. That is ret-con.org.
Is it a writer's con?
There are going to be a ton of writers there, I know for sure. But it's
Writers'
also going
cons
to
are
be
a
like
blast.
everything. It's all things fandom.
Cool. Redcon.
Hansi?
I'm Hansi Oppenheimer. You can find me at Sweet Projects on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I have a website, sweetprojects.com. Right now, I'm working on an essay for ACA fandom book about the boys. And I am archiving 20 years of interviews with women in fandom for University for Pop Culture Studies. And I'm trying to convince Nikon to let me make a documentary about them. Because horror writers are awesome.
Nancy?
You can find me at nancynorthcott.com or on Twitter where I'm at Nancy Northcott. While I technically have a Facebook author page, I'm not there very much. As far as new releases go, The King's Champion, the last book in the Boar King's Honor trilogy, will be out sometime this year. Embattled Mage will be out by the time you see this, but start that series from the beginning with Mage, Sentinel, or Renegade. And that's about it.
Thanks. I appreciate you letting us know which one to start with.
Well, it matters. There's an
It matters. To me, it matters. I have to be chronological.
Jess?
You can find me at jessicanettlesauthor.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, especially if you want to see lovely black cats and listen to me go on about my baking.
You are
my
rich.
my next con is Multiverse in Atlanta in October. I am currently featured in A Woman Unbecoming, which is a wonderful anthology that everybody should purchase. All the money goes for my brain just went poof.
Reproductive rights.
For
Cool.
Yeah.
It's a charity anthology. Please buy it.
That's great.
I'm also coming up in another anthology in October called Lonely Hollows. It's been a long week.
Yeah,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
all recovering from Dragon Con,
Yeah,
except for Stuart.
except for Stuart.
So-
And me.
Yeah, and me.
Look, you were slacking off the entire weekend. Sorry, Stuart. And you, where can we find you?
Me?
Yeah.
You can find me. I know this is going to shock you all. You can find me at stuartjaffe.com. You can find me on Facebook, Stuart Jaffe, Facebook group, Stuart Jaffe's Madhouse. I've got books coming out all the time, so I'm sure something is coming up soon. Since we've been talking about witches, Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, it begins with Southern Bound, which is a free ebook if you like ebooks. So grab it for free, and you can see if you like it. And if you do like it, there's a lot of it. I'll be working on the 16th book in the series later this year. And appearances wise, the last thing I'll be doing this year is the first weekend of December. I'll be in Columbus, Ohio for GalaxyCon Ohio.
And Jeannie.
Well, you can find me, as Stuart said, predictably, at JeanneAdams.com. I know, right? You can find me on all the social media, including Instagram and Twitter, where I spend way too much time, and more time than is good for me. I should be writing, not playing on the socials. Where, Jessica, you have Black Cats and Cooking. I had mostly Scotland for the last year, and puppy dogs. And I'll be
home.
Thank you. I'll be at Capclave in October, and I'll be hopefully at a bunch of cons next year. And I've got some things coming out, but it's all depending on whether I have brain space to do it or not. So just watch this space. And of course, you can always find me here on ConTinual.
And I've been trying to herd these chickens. I'm Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, the Speculative Fiction Academy, and of course here at ConTinual. And we will see everybody again soon.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
you.
Thank you.